He is a young prodigy with a bright future and a beautiful girlfriend living the dream life. But all this changes when he gets kicked out of his party and is forced to start from scratch once again. So he gathers a group of outcasts and leads them to become the strongest tri-pass party in the world. The story begins with Nick's life flipping upside down as he gets kicked out of his party called the Masters of War by Argus, who he looked up to as a father figure. And as if that wasn't enough, his so-called girlfriend betrays and dumps him the very same day as well. The poor guy sits on a fountain in the rain, getting completely soaked and too broken to pay attention. He remembers the fight with Argus where he refuses to forgive some guy named Gasso who ran off with all their hard-earned money just to impress some random girl. Argus flips it around and calls him selfish and tells him that he is not cut out to be an adventurer. He reminds him how he took him in when he was just a kid and tells him to go find some other place where he actually belongs. While he's almost breaking down, a blue-haired girl appears holding an umbrella. She says he looks like a stray dog and casually hands him a ticket to her idol concert. Nick stares at her and says she doesn't look like any idol, then asks why she's even here. The girl says she's just starting out and that cheering people up is part of her job and passion. She gives him her umbrella and dashes off, asking him to show up at her concert. Nick doesn't want to go, but still ends up attending the show of that girl named Agate. And before he knows it, he turns into a hardcore idol otaku who blows all his savings on every bit of merchandise he can get, wanting to earn more to fuel his honest otaku lifestyle. The guy shows up at the Adventurers Guild and starts scouting for rookies to build a fresh team. There, Nick spots a guy and tries to approach him. But the moment he makes a move, the guy plays dumb and Nick ends up not talking to a single soul. After wasting all that time, he drags himself to a tavern and orders the cheapest thing on the menu just to avoid kicking the bucket. He looks around and sees everyone laughing and wonders if he'll ever get to laugh like that again. That's when three adventurers walk in and sit at his table. He thinks they might be a party, but since none of them even bother to speak, he figures out they're all loners just like him. One of those adventurers happens to be a fierce yet elegant-looking magic user, and from her crystal staff and flashy clothes, Nick figures she must be some noble. After staring at her for a bit, his eyes shift to a drunken cleric who looks like he's already been kicked out of his church. Then he turns to the third one, which is a dragon girl. Nick tries giving her a friendly smile, but she just sits there with the same dead serious face, which doesn't even flinch. Just then, their drinks arrive. Nick sinks into gloom and starts spiraling, thinking anyone he befriends would just end up betraying him anyway, and wonders if he'll ever be able to trust someone again. He downs the whole drink in one go and slams the mug on the table, only to hear the others do the exact same thing as they all shout in sync that they can't trust anyone either. They freeze and stare at each other in utter disbelief. The rich mage girl among them, named Tana, begins sharing her story. One day, after pulling off a lightning spell, which in this world means combining water and wind magic, she gets praised by her schoolmaster. She gets excited beyond words and rushes off to tell her fiancé Alex about her progress. There she finds the guy sitting with some random girl named Lynn. She sits beside him, too kind to even realize that her man is cheating on her, and happily shares how her teacher loved her lightning magic. But then she finally notices the girl next to him and asks who she is. Out of nowhere, her fiancé starts accusing her of bullying Lynn at school and then goes on a rant, saying all she ever does is brag about her magic. He suddenly snaps, claiming he always felt looked down on because of her. And right then and there, he breaks off the engagement, dumping her on the spot and marrying Lynn in front of her eyes. After Tana's school ends, the poor, heartbroken girl starts looking for a job, but everywhere she goes, people turn her down, saying a noble lady like her is way too soft for real work. After getting rejected from every place she tries, Tana ends up at a racetrack and somehow wins her first few bets, making a ton of cash right away. She gets hooked instantly, but before long, she loses everything and ends up broke, barely able to pay her rent. She then tries finding a partner for adventuring, but anyone who sees her gets intimidated by the fierce and stone-cold look on her face. She even tries forcing a smile, but nothing works. And with zero luck left, she ends up in this tavern sitting beside Nick. Nick then turns to the cleric guy whose name is Zen and asks about his story. Zen says he used to be a cleric in some small, random city. There was this little girl named Muriel who used to help him gather herbs in exchange for a bit of money. Things were normal until one day the girl suddenly falls in love with him and even holds his hand, asking him to marry her. Zen gently refuses, saying he's a man of the cloth and can't get married. But the moment he refuses the underage marriage proposal, the girl bursts into tears and runs off crying, calling him a jerk as she disappears. A few days later, just as Zen is about to be promoted to High Cleric, the guards suddenly show up looking for him with Muriel standing behind them, looking like something terrible has happened to her. Zen rushes over to her, but the guards stop him, restraining him. The girl accuses him of some serious crimes, and before he can explain himself, Zen is thrown into prison. He spends the next months behind bars, and when he's finally released, he's banished with everyone calling him a pervert. After being cast out, Zen finds himself at an inn where he stays with a lady. There, he helps the lady relieve her back pain, and in return, she advises him to visit the Labyrinth City and become an adventurer. Zen explains that this is how he ended up becoming a ladies' man and eventually found himself sitting in this tavern. Listening to both of their stories, Nick argues that he can't believe a word they say and asks if they feel the same. Zen, however, declares that he's going to defeat the Demon King. Nick turns to the Dragonian, whose name is Curran, and asks her to share her side as well. She simply responds, shouting that something important was stolen from her, and even worse, by the person who meant the most to her. Then, Nick reveals his backstory, explaining how a girl named Claudine dumped him and how he found out she had been using him all along. Suddenly, Nick wakes up to find himself upside down, his face pressed against the floor. It becomes clear that all of them have been sleeping in the same room. He quickly gets up, wakes them all up, and tells them to leave, only to realize that it's not his place. Jenna then calmly tells him that he should be the one leaving as it's her place. Before you go, tell me one thing. Later that morning, all four losers stroll into the guild, staring at a young receptionist as if she owes them something. An old guild lady shows up, scolding them for making the cute receptionist cry. She recognizes Nick from the Masters of War and starts going through their guild registration form. She points at Curran and mentions that she's the famous survivor girl who apparently came back alive after soloing a C-ranked dungeon. She adds that staying alive is the most important thing for adventurers and asks about their party's name. Nick proudly responds with Survivor and smiles, saying that no matter what, they'll make sure to come back alive. The others also approve of the name and shout out their new party name. After they're done with registration, Nick brings up 3 rules for their new party, which include never messing with each other's hobbies, always watching the money, and no matter what happens, they all have to come back alive. Instead of letting one person handle the cash, Nick suggests they all share responsibility for saving it while explaining how they do it. They end up laughing and joking that Nick would be the worst at cracking the safe anyway. That's when Z looks at him and asks why he's being so paranoid about the money part, upon which Nick shares a bit of his past to explain. ZM adds that Nick basically wants them to trust and doubt each other at the same time, which Curran finds kind of annoying. Still, they all talk about how much they wish they could trust someone again, but agree to stay skeptical for now, just for their own sake. The party heads over to the Sticky Aqueducts, which turns out to be one of the 3 labyrinths they're allowed to explore. While stuck at their starting rank G, Nick takes the lead and explains that once they manage to clear 2 dungeons, they would be promoted to F rank. As Nick keeps going on with his lecture, he suddenly steps on something slimy, but lucky for him, it doesn't end up being a trap. That's when he introduces the very first prey of the survivors party, which just so happens to be a small, harmless-looking slime munching on weeds. Everyone can't help but point out how adorable the little thing is. But Nick explains that even though this squishy cutie doesn't look threatening at all, it can actually turn into a giant menace that might start munching on cows if it manages to sneak into a farm. He then shows them how to deal with the slime and completely stuns everyone when he casually takes out its core. And that's all it takes. He wraps it up by telling them to make sure they collect all those crystals since they're meant to be exchanged for money later on. On their way to the top, Zen teases Tiana by asking if joining the party was just a gamble for her, which makes her protest as she complains to Nick that Z is breaking the rule by interfering in her business. Nick smiles and quietly wonders if forming this party might have actually been the right decision. Z then tries taking down a slime and admits it feels kind of wrong to take a creature's life. Everyone tries convincing him and they all end up discussing why monsters even attack humans, though no one really comes to a clear answer. Nick reminds them to stay alert, and Tiana argues that the only change they've seen in slime so far is that they've gotten faster. She then brags about how she once took out orcs and goblins, but right after that, she trips, and Nick Nick casually, mentions that the slimes here shoot sticky fluids and are about as slippery as a banana peel. The mage gets embarrassed after messing up and quickly casts Icicle Dance in her rage, but she misses and accidentally fires it at Curran, who barely manages to block it with her sword. Tana asks if she's all right and apologizes, but Curran turns cold and tells her to be careful, arguing it might be her next time, who ends up striking her by mistake. This incident puts a dent in their newly formed bond, and the two girls begin avoiding each other. A while later, they reach the top floor of the dungeon, where Nick once again reminds everyone to stay alert. That's when Zen spots a massive slime monster, and Nick tells them it's the dungeon's boss. Hearing that, the mage suddenly charges at the monster, claiming she can take it down on her own, but only ends up creating a complete mess. The party ends up washing their clothes by the riverside after the mess. Nick explains how giant slimes react to strong magic by splashing slime everywhere. He then tells Z that his place is in the rear and he should rely on others to protect him. Nick removes his armor and reveals all his strengths and weaknesses, even admitting he knows nothing about magic. When the others ask why he's revealing so much, he tells them that if they understand each other better, it might help them build trust. He gives a small pep talk, trying to lift their spirits and keep them motivated. Hearing this, Z finally opens up and shares his own strengths and weaknesses, too. Tiana steps in front of Curran, bows an apology, and then reveals her strengths as well. This gesture seems to soften the dragonoid's heart, and when Tiana sits down and starts acting cold, Curran lets out a sneeze that shoots a little ember toward her to start a fire and warm her up, though she jokingly claimed she was trying to roast her alive, but missed. That little moment finally seems to patch things up between the two. Next, our heroes make their way to the Goblin Forest, where Nick explains that these monsters are generally weak as long as no one ends up getting surrounded by a whole pack. Just then, a goblin jumps out and attacks Z out of nowhere, but luckily, he manages to deflect the attack. Nick steps in quickly and finishes the creature off. After that, the survivors go up against a whole horde of goblins, most of which Nick takes down on his own. That's when Jenna reveals her detection skill. With her skill, Jenna points out that one of the monsters is holding way too much magic to be just a regular goblin. Nick tells the team it's likely an ogre, which is an evolved form of a hobgoblin. The survivors briefly consider retreating, but then agree to move forward, reasoning about both the reward and the people who could be in danger if they leave the goblins and the ogre unchecked. They put together a plan that mainly relies on Nick and Curran, since magic doesn't work on evolved ogres. On their way, Curran and Shauna again bring up their trust issues nonsense and end up agreeing to give each other another shot. All of a sudden, Curran senses a monster nearby and takes off after it, with the others quickly following behind. Z casts a magic buff to boost their strength, while Tana uses her spells to clear the path ahead. As the battle heats up, the talking ogre orders its minions to attack. Curran's legs start to tremble as she wants to trust Tiana again, and Tiana feels the same. The two finally place their trust in each other, and the mage casts her spell, which passes cleanly through Curran without harming her, clearing all the goblins in its path.